Monica, is service on board?
Good morning, everyone. I've seen some comments on the chat box that you couldn't hear me before, or some people are not able to hear properly. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Jacqueline Kagume, and I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. On behalf of the IEA, we are pleased to welcome you to this meeting here. We are glad that you found the opportunity to be able to join us for this 26th webinar. For those of you who haven't interacted with IEA before, the IEA is a think tank, a public policy think tank based in Nairobi, and our mission is to utilize evidence innovation and as well as research to inform decision making in Kenya. We currently work across 5 program areas, and today we are here on the invitation of the Law and Economy program to discuss an agenda that I will share with you shortly. From the title of the meeting, I'm sure you are all able to see that our discussion today is to look at the systemic weaknesses in the laws and practice of public procurement in Kenya. And to do that, we'll have a presentation. We have 3 speakers, one main presentation on a study that we've conducted, and then we'll have 2 discussants basically making some comments after the main presentation in terms of feedback from the analysis that will be presented before us. But before I go into more details on that, I'll give a brief background of the project that informs this discussion here today. And our discussion today is anchored on a project that we've been conducting on civic engagement for open contracting. It's a project supported by HIVOS. I believe some of our colleagues from HIVOS will be able to join this meeting later. But in terms of the objective of the project, it's mainly to help increase civic actors or civil society organizations and citizens' engagement with public procurement processes. So the project is on open contracting, and looking at open contracting, it's basically about following public money across the entire chain of public contracts. So the objective of the project is to help as many citizens as possible be able to engage with or rather follow use of public money for enhanced accountability, transparency, and basically to enhance better management of public funds. So open contracting is about providing open, accurate, complete, and reusable data. That's what the broader project where IEA's work has been placed under. That was those are some of the objectives. It's about opening up government contracts, so that which is not only beneficial to the state and non-state actors, but to help in monitoring and tracking government spending. So under this open contracting project, IEA has over the past 2 years undertaken an analysis of, or rather looked at our public procurement system. We've conducted 2 studies over the last 2 financial years on looking at some of the recurring or recurrent issues with the system. And some of you may have been able to attend a previous launch of a report that we had, which was basically an analysis of public procurement violations, but based on data available in the Auditor General's reports. So we've documented that over the last 2 years. But besides that, we also wanted to undertake an overhaul, look at the entire system broadly, because we seem, even from our previous analysis of the Auditor General's reports, we seem to see that there's a repeat in certain these recurrent violations, and the recurrent violations, some of them usually seem to be at different stages of the procurement process. So we wanted to interrogate and find out whether the problem is in law, the legislative requirements, rather the regulatory regime on public procurement, whether the main issue is with the law or the main issue is in the institutions, or what exactly is causing this recurrent violations in government contracting. So besides our normal, what IEA has been doing on analysis of the Auditor General's reports, we sought or engaged an expert to help us review the entire public procurement system in Kenya, looking at the institutions mandated by the Constitution and the Public Procurement Act and other legislations that she will discuss here, to help us understand where the systemic issues arise from. And she has done a comprehensive paper for us, and she'll be presenting the findings. So that's the background of the reason we are here today. We have had several reports, and this is a third report, which is basically now helping us try to flesh out where the main issues with procurement in Kenya is, whether it's in the practice, whether it's in the institutions or the laws. So to do that, this report in partnership with IEA has been developed by Ms. Joanne Onyango. Joanne is an economist turned lawyer. From her profile, which she shared with me, she has previously worked in the financial sector as a banker. She worked in credit administration before transitioning into the Kenya Law Reform Commission. So she has a background working with government processes, having worked as a planner and loans officer in the public service at a state corporation. And later on, she transitioned into law. So she's an economist turned lawyer. And I think that provides a good capacities for her to be able to undertake the analysis that she has done with this report. So I will invite Joanne to basically help us understand the findings from her analysis, which she will do in about 30 minutes or so. Later on, we will have the two discussants who I will introduce as we go. After that, we will have a plenary session. So in the meantime, as she makes the presentation on the findings of this analysis, I request you to note down any comments that you might have. Because this is not a final report, we'll still go and improve on it again. So I'll request you to note down your comments. You can ask on the chat box. This platform has a chat box, which by now I know most of you have been able to interact with before. So you can ask your questions there, or you can note them down and verbally ask later when we come to plenary, which will be moderated by our CEO, Mr. Kwame. Kindly keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking, and right now it's only the main speaker who will be on the floor. So kindly have your microphone muted, as well as your videos. You can only turn them on when speaking, because this is a recorded conversation. So later on in plenary, if you'd like to, you can unmute and speak, but for this, we request you to just keep your microphone and your videos muted. So thank you very much, and without any more details, I'll invite Joanne to take us through the analysis. Joanne, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for that great invitation. As you've heard, I am Joanne, and I'm going to take you through the practice of public procurement in Kenya. Let me have my video on. I will share a small presentation with you. And just to begin, can you be able to see the screen on your end?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So basically what I will do is take you through an introduction of the presentation and just connect governance and social accountability to public procurement. We'll then have a snapshot of a World Bank measure for public procurement life cycle, and we'll then jump into what the practical practice of public procurement is in Kenya. And in that, we look at the legal and institutional framework, and then go into the state of play. And then finally, we look at the broad policy recommendations that we have made or have made in respect to the findings. So I will start by just bringing you on board and just bringing your mind to focus on what we need to look at when we think about public procurement. And I got three quotes that
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you kindly enter full screen so that it's easier for people to follow the presentation?
Sorry for that. Is that better?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jacqueline. I will just refocus you. I just want to focus you to what public procurement is by taking you through three quotes that I came across that I found very interesting, just to make us think about what public procurement should mean to us. The first one is by John Glenn. John Glenn is an astronaut, an American astronaut, that made this observation as he was up in the dark during one of their missions. And what he said was, as I hurtled through space, one thought kept crossing my mind, and it was, every part of this rocket was supplied by the lowest bidder. So here is a situation where this guy is up in the sky. It's not your normal journey, and yet every bit of that journey involves someone supplying something to bring it together at the lowest bidder. So what does that mean? There was quality in that supply. Secondly, when we look at public procurement, someone unknown observed that the world's poorest and most vulnerable populations are the most dependent on public goods and services. They feel the brunt of waste and corruption in public procurement more than anyone else. So what are we saying? When there's waste in public procurement, when there's corruption, then it's the vulnerable people who suffer because services are not given well. Just the general social infrastructure of a country is wasted. And then also, in respect to private sector, Catherine Masinde, who's a manager at the World Bank, opined that public funds are scarce and governments must invest with intention. So improving public procurement systems contribute to a vibrant private sector, which helps governments get the most out of its investment and support. Value for money is also very important when we look at public procurement. So I'll just go on to the discussions, and I will begin with the introduction. Of course, we know what public procurement is, and it's actually the acquisition, through contractual arrangements of goods, services, works by public sector from private sector. So here's a situation where we are mixing government and private sector. So the procurement process copes a cycle of identifying the need. You must understand what you want to buy as a government. And even the people who you're engaging with must also understand what the government needs, because it's only then that they're able to procure. So in doing this, there must be planning, because you cannot just spend without planning as an institution. And selection of suppliers is also very important before awarding the contracts and its management, because the quality of your suppliers, the ethical values of your suppliers is very important, and also just the whole essence of them being able to afford to supply the right products at the right price. So what are we saying? Overall, governments across the world spend up to 9.5 trillion each year procuring. And this is a source from the World Bank. So you can see how much money that goes through the procurement system globally. So why is it important? Public procurement is important because it's actually a means of economic policy and really an ideal quality of governance. If you get your public procurement right, then it means your governance structure in a country is right. So it's very important to always get public procurement right, because it's a reflection on how government is running. Achieving sustainable goal number 1 of ending poverty is important, and public procurement drives this, and also the other goals, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I've mentioned that public procurement has a direct correlation to public governance. And why do I say so? In public governance, the 3 pillars for it is effectiveness and success lie in increased value for money. You need improved public service delivery and creating environments for businesses to thrive. So these 3 pillars also directly, are linked to public procurement, because when you procure, you're looking at value for money. When you're procuring to deliver services to the people, and the quantity and quality of service is important, and also you're driving the economic will within a country. So in terms of government and social accountability in procurement, we have seen a lot of reforms that have happened just in the realm of public procurement. These reforms began especially 20 or so years ago globally, and mostly there were reforms engaged in just putting in place that regulatory framework and institutional framework that supports public procurement. So at the core of good governance is effective financial management, which involve a multi-stakeholder engagement, involves effective checks and balances, and also decentralizing and public participation. So this is something that public procurement is going through. Right now, we are more concentrated on combating corruption and waste by improving accountability and transparency. So we have laws in place, we have institutions in place to just support the system. But what is happening now is we need to ensure that we bring in as many people as possible into the fray so that we are able to have those, effective checks and balances. We are able to get people to just engage in how the public is procuring. And that's why you find that even the budget making process of this country is very participatory, and because the citizens have to be involved on how, not only on how they are governed, but on how these services are delivered to them. So what is happening is within governance and social accountability, you must be fair. As a government, you must be transparent. You must have timely complaint mechanisms, entrench in your governance structure, and by extension, public procurement, as this increases trust in the process. So what are we saying? We are saying that the more disclosure there is during this process, and especially at the award space, the greater public participation, because people are able to understand and just see what is being bought and who is it being bought from. There's very scarce empirical data on public procurement generally. And as a result of this, the World Bank undertook an exercise to just measure performance of public procurement globally. And it's doing this by compiling a report that is called the Procurement Benchmark. It's a 3-year it's running its 3-year course right now. The initial study or evaluation commenced in 2015. And what happened at that time is they measured 11 economies at the pilot stage. And the purpose for that measurement was to establish the state of public procurement, regulatory environment, and their impact on companies in doing businesses with government. So the 2015 evaluation was based on 11 economies, and this has since increased to 77 economies in 2016. We are grateful that Kenya was included in the 2016 evaluation. And subsequently, in 2017, where they measured 180 economies, we also had Kenya involved. What is happening in the first measurements, they basically looked at the regulatory and institutional frameworks, whether economies had established the necessary legislation and institutional framework to just guide the procurement process. So you'll find that the evaluations in 2015 and 2016 were just around the regulatory framework. However, in 2017, they went ahead and unpacked the specific procurement steps just to establish how well, now that the economies have proper regulatory frameworks, how are they implementing the regulatory frameworks in respect to the steps within the procurement process. So the method of determining score was based on specific questions that were unpacked from each of the procurement processes. So I'll just take you through the scores. The measurements were out of 100 points. You can actually go online. The report is online. You'll find it on the World Bank website, and there's a large explanation on how they develop the score, the indicators for the score. So you'll be able to understand better how they came up with the measurements. So for Kenya, I picked the 2016 and 2017 outcomes because that's where Kenya was involved. And in 2016, like I mentioned, the measure was mainly based on availability of country legislation. And in preparation of bids, Kenya scored 80 points out of 100 because the legislation and attendant regulations had provisions in law in respect to how bids are supposed to be prepared. The same was the case with submitting and evaluating of bids in relation to timelines, where the Kenya scored the possible 100 points. In awarding and executing contracts, we scored 80. Availability of reporting and complaints mechanisms within the law, we scored 60. In relation to first year review, and first year review is the review that happens, within the procurement process, right from the time when the bids are called up to the time when contracts are awarded. There's an opportunity there for participants to just report and complain. And at that point in time in 2016, the legislation had those provisions, and as a result, we scored 60, which was moderate. At the time in relation to time availed for filing a complaint, the legislation had given 14 days and 30 days to review the same. But the practice, the actual time that the regulatory review board had, the complaints review board had to just listen to the complaints was 22.5 days, which was below the legal requirement at the time, which I think is a good thing. In 2017, the evaluation was broadened and deepened, and there was more, intention in understanding better how public procurement was working in the 180 economies that were measured. So what we have for Kenya is on needs assessment and call for tender and bid preparation. Kenya scored 57% out of the possible 100 points, which is moderate. And on bid submission, we scored 69. You realize that because the measurement or the evaluation is more stringent, than the scores are getting lower and lower. In terms of bid evaluation and award, the country scored 71 points. Content and management of procurement contracts, we were at 73. Performance guarantee, we were at 58. And payment of supplies to the contractors, we were doing very badly at 37 points. And, complaints mechanisms was not measured in terms of points per se, but they were just looking at the time taken to just deal with complaints that came through. So I still urge you to go to the report, and you'll be able to understand a little more on how the measurements were undertaken. On payment of supplies, we are doing badly at 37%. But this is common with other economies as well, apart from the high income economies where this particular indicator is scoring very well. So what does that mean? It means that when you're a high performing economy, then your governance structures work well, and so the procurement element of governance moves very smoothly and as intended. So what were the objectives of this analysis? Sorry for that spelling mistake. The main three objectives for undertaking this analysis was just to understand the practical system and practice of public procurement in Kenya, and also to review trends that identify the recurrent challenges in public procurement. So we'll end this by just recommending policies for, proposals for policy improvement. So what approach did we use? We reviewed the legal and regulatory framework, and of course the institutions that support the system for procurement in Kenya. We also reviewed the Auditor General reports. I'm sorry for that omission. Auditor General reports. We reviewed the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority reports and manuals that they have to just guide the procurement process, and other silent reports on public procurement in Kenya and other economies. So what is the practice of public procurement in Kenya? First of all, I'll take you through the evolution of public procurement in Kenya. And why am I doing this? I just want us to appreciate how far we've come in managing public procurement, which has become a very critical function in a country, because it's through public procurement that government invests. It's through public procurement that government offers services to its people. So how has public procurement evolved? From 1955 to 2001, public procurement was regulated through government circulars and later through supplies manuals. At some point, I think this must have been in the 80s, public procurement was regulated by something called a Blue Book, and this specifically was in the area of district focus for rural development strategies. So you find that the Blue Book, which was a Nyachai initiative, was very specific in guiding how public procurement was done to develop the rural areas. And that at that point in time, public procurement was very much centralized and was at the Treasury. Before that, it was domiciled at the Ministry of Works and then later moved to the Treasury. So later in 2001, after a survey that was sponsored by the World Bank, it was established that there needed to be a regulatory framework to guide public procurement. And that was the first time that we see public procurement regulated under law. So the Exchequer and Audit public procurement regulations were developed and gazetted pursuant to Section 5A of the Exchequer and Audit Act. And it was just a stopgap measure pending development and enactment of a proper public procurement law. And in 2005, we have a fully fledged Public Procurement Assets and Disposal Act developed for the country. And it's at this time that we really began to organize our public procurement function within government. Come 2010, we have a very progressive constitution which recognizes specifically public procurement as a function that needs to be looked into and regulated properly, because there's a lot of wastage and loss for government in that arena. And just also to meet some of the thresholds of inclusivity in the Constitution, we had the preference and reservation regulations promulgated through a Gazette notice, and the purpose was just to protect certain population within the country to also benefit from public procurement. And of course, in 2015, we had the Act repealed, and that's where we have the current public procurement law that I think is progressive, that I think is good and fit for purpose. So what are the components of an efficient public procurement system? For you to have an efficient, for a country to have an efficient public procurement system, you must, one, have a proper legislative framework, a strong legislative framework to support it. And within it, have a remedies mechanism. Of course, because public procurement involves a lot of taxpayers' money, we must have a sanctions regime, supporting institutional framework, and of course, adequate resources to support the function. And in adequate resources, human resource plays a critical role in ensuring that the public procurement system works at its optimum. So what is the legal framework that supports public procurement in Kenya? We have international instruments that we must, refer to whenever we deal with issues on public procurement, considering that our constitution under Article 2, recognizes those international instruments as our law. So on that strength, we also must ensure that the provisions of those international instruments that we have ratified then must form part of our law. And when we look at those, we look at UNCAC, which is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Public procurement presents very big opportunities for corruption. We also must look at the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, and it's based on this particular institution, a model law that was developed by UNCITRAL, UNCITRAL, that the Public Procurement Act is anchored. We also have the WTO government procurement agreements, and of course a similar instrument for the African Union. We also need to look at the Constitution of Kenya as part of the supporting legal framework. The main law, that is the Public Procurement Assets and Disposals Act, and attendant regulations, which also guidelines from Treasury and the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority manuals and circulars flow from. To just support the legislation on public procurement, we also have other legislation that we must adhere to, even as we deal with issues of public procurement. Public procurement is procurement by government, and so there we also need to look at the Public Officers Ethics Act, which regulates, public officers in respect to ethics. We have the Anti-Corruption and Crimes Act and Economic Crimes Act. We have the Bribery Act, Public Finance Act, and various codes and manuals that include the Mwongozo Code of Governance for State Corporations, and the other human resource manuals that regulate conduct of public servants who also happen to be procurement officers in government. So what is the institutional framework that supports public procurement? The Public Procurement Act establishes gives roles to the National Treasury, and one of the main roles that the National Treasury has in public procurement is the development of a national public procurement policy, and also just issue guidelines on how the state departments should run public procurements because it has a direct link to, public finance. So the Public Procurement Act gives Treasury, National Treasury, a role, and a similar role is also given to county treasury, so that in the management of public funds at county level, then the county treasury is involved. Public procurement, the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority is also established under the Act, and this is the main body that actually monitors compliance of procurement entities to the laws that regulate public procurement. It is an authority that is managed through a board, and before 2 years ago, before the enactment of before the amendment of the Public Procurement Act in 2016, the authority was actually an oversight body, but now it was given more teeth to regulate and carry out inspections of public procurement entities to just ensure that compliance of law is achieved. Under the same Act, we also have the Public Procurement Administration Review Board, which mainly deals with disputes within the public procurement arena. And what I must say is the board, the Administrative Review Board has done very good work in just, dispensing solutions to dispute that arise in public procurement. And other organs that you find supporting the public procurement arena are the internal organization of public entities, where you have public procurement committees established by the accounting officers of the various organizations to just run the whole aspect of public procurement within the various public institutions. Play of public procurement in Kenya currently. The chart that you have on your screen just explains in a snapshot on what public procurement involves. You start with the planning process, where you have the various. They're called the what? The various departments that need procurement done on their behalf. They must give their needs assessed. They must give their needs so that the institutions, the various procurement entities, are able to, one, identify the needs of the users first before they can identify money for it. So before money is identified, the procurement entity must go through a needs assessment, time from which that is budgeted for. Suppliers are sought through the bid process, and successful bidders then are awarded contracts that they execute. Upon awarding of contract, then whatever form of procurement that has happened, be it supply of goods, be it supply of consultancy services or building of works, building of roads, then that is delivered. And in delivering this, of course, inspections have to happen to ensure that whatever is delivered is as per the criteria that was set during the bidding process. And of course, there's the contract administration and issues of stores and inventory management come in. Why? Because when supplies are put in store, we must ensure that these supplies are protected from theft, one, and are also utilized properly for the benefit of the people of Kenya. So the PPAD provides for methods to be applied in the procurement process. So the methods to be applied, as good as, open tendering. There are some that allow for single sourcing. Of course, those are methods that are explained within the Procurement Act, and within there, whatever method you're using, there are provisions to be followed to ensure that the whole process is fair. The law also provides for advertising rules. There are time limits within processes, and of course, specifications of tenders and how they are drawn. So what happens is the procurement law lays out the whole tendering process, and also very clearly offers dispute resolution mechanisms at all levels of the supply chain management of government and its entities. So I'll go into the specific analysis that make the procurement practice successful, or at the state at which it is. And I will start with the professional competence. What we establish is that there is great disparity across government on the competence of procurement officers. There are instances of some ministries having highly professional units and procure large amounts of money on a yearly basis, but in others there's dire need of assistance. So there's no balance within government entities in respect to competence of the human resource in public procurement. 14 procuring entities assessed by PPRA in 2017 established issues of understaffing, and some of the members within those procuring entities were not members of the supplies professional bodies. So maybe they're there by virtue of experience, but that is a gap that was established. And then there was also inadequate technical expertise to handle technical specifications. Technical specifications are what determine what type of procurement and standard that a procurement entity gets at the end of the day. And so when you do not have this technical expertise, then either you have to go hire it from outside, which is then another, whole procurement effort, or you end up getting very weak or very inadequate technical specifications, which then leads to, the whole end product failing or is weak. This is something that the PPRA and the Treasury have noted, and interventions in training are going on, and I hope this will be able to bring up the technical competence in that very important function within the procurement, public procurement sector. In respect to needs assessment, what happens is, for us to determine what the needs is, we need to undertake a market analysis. And this market analysis are based on the procurement plans, which organizations have given, after the user units establish what their needs are, then these are all packed into procurement plans. And the procurement plans form the basis for the needs assessments. So what happens? With the needs assessment, then the procurement entities have to go to the market, to just establish what the prices are for these needs. And this is, is an area that's seldom done. We establish it's an issue. It's an area that doesn't have so much focus, and it predisposes this phase of procurement into integrity risks. Why? If there's no proper market analysis, then you end up procuring, services and works at sometimes very, very exorbitant prices, which now again leads to loss of money and a lot of wastage. Again, what we established is the regulator of public procurement has a mandate to publish the market price indexes every quarter of the year. This is not regular, as is currently expected. So you find that sometimes there's actually a lull of up to a year. Then, you know, when you go to their website, you realize that, yeah, there are 6 months delays. So you find that the market price indices are not coming up as regularly as they should do to, you know, assist the procurement entities and the accounting officers in making decisions on what prices to buy goods, services, and works for whenever they need to. So what does the law say, and what is the practice in terms of procurement planning and budgeting? Procurement planning and budgeting is a legal requirement. It's something that all institutions are obligated to do. You cannot procure for a good, a service, or works that you did not budget for. You actually must procure for something that you budgeted for, and funds have to be available to pay the supplier contractor, you know, of these goods and services. Reporting during the 2017-2018 procurement annual plans submitted by 153 procuring entities showed that you know, this is not the case. I mean, very few procurement entities are actually submitting their procurement plans to the regulator. You can imagine how many procurement entities we have in this country, and in this during the 2017-2018 fiscal year, only 153 procurement entities submitted their procurement plans. Then it becomes a problem. We also established that at the PPRA, these reports, the reports that the compliance reports that they're supposed to generate, are very inconsistent, and even just the information that you have in those reports are not adequate to make you know, policy makers, to make, you know, stakeholders within the procurement arena make informed decision. Again, from in relation to procurement planning and budgeting, we established that maybe the reason why the regulator is not able to, you know, undertake its regulation functions well is because out of an establishment of 115, they only have 63 members of staff. So I guess there's a capacity issue there. There's need to empower the regulator to be able to undertake that critical function efficiently. On development of contract specifications, there's a lot of inadequacies that we observed here, and development of specification in bids, in bid documents still remain a challenge, and this was attested by a report, an annual report undertaken by the PPRA. And as a result of this, you find that there are delays in preparation of technical specifications, scope of work, terms of reference, and so disrupts even the procurement plan at the end of the day. So what is the status of procurement method and bidding procedures? We experienced a lot of invitations of bids being absent, evaluation and award criteria are not announced, and procurement information is also not disclosed or made public. So you find that sometimes, as much as the bids are on the online, you know, for some instances, when evaluations are done and awards are given, there's no feedback. There's no proper feedback mechanism to unsuccessful bidders, and no reasons are given to why they were unsuccessful. And this is very important for transparency, so that the system is trusted, so that people are able to make decisions on why they were not successful in bidding in the bids that they made. It also helps the private sector in improving on how they make their bids, and just improving as you know, private organizations, so that the next time they bid, then they will know where their weaknesses are. Section 75 of the Act allows for modification of tender documents at any stage. This is open to integrity risks, because what we establish is there are times when these modifications are made and participants in tenders are not informed. And so it presents a lot of unfairness in that whole process. So there's also gaps between the country's procurement legislation and requirements, legislation requirements and their implementation in practice. So you find that a lot of times the legislation is in terms of procurement method, and this is something that we established with you know, some aspects in the counties in respect to what was observed by the Auditor General, the Office of the Auditor General. You find that some county governments just purchase goods on a single source basis without care and without supporting document, and yet the law is very clear on how that is supposed to be done. So what are the areas that are open to abuse in respect to procurement methods and bidding? The issue of extension of tender validity period, I've just talked about it, may be prompted by conflict of interest. Maybe someone has spoken to, you know, someone else within the procurement entities, and yeah, so they actually collude to extend or to modify, you know, and extend the tender validity period, which is allowed under Section 75, and this opens up the whole process to, you know, integrity risks. So we also have cases of procuring entities not adhering to the evaluation criteria, or using criteria that is not specified in the tender documents. Again, this is a departure from what the law anticipates. So out of the 613 complaints handled by the procurement regulator, 46% of those were in respect of flaws in tender evaluation and specifications. So what are we saying? Almost half of the complaints that were received actually were related to, you know, the evaluation, the flaws in evaluation and specifications of tenders. In respect to award of tender, we find that, you know, award of tender effectively commences upon receipt of accounting officer of procuring entities evaluation report, and during the year 2019-2020, a total of 2,377 tenders were awarded at a cost of 60.3 billion. This is the information that we came across on the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority's website. I'm not sure this is the right figure, because I believe tenders were much more than this during that specific year, and that's why I have question marks. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that, you know, information that's uploaded in terms of tender awards on the website is not up to date. There's a lot of information that's left out, and so it actually makes people have doubts, and especially when we continuously hear in the press about how tendering processes are going bad. So it's important for the regulator to just up their game and upload tender words in a centralized e-portal that everyone and anyone can access. In awarding tenders as well, vendors always fail. Many a times vendors are failing to disclose accurate cost or pricing data in the price proposals, which results in price increases and also attracts a lot of conflict of interest and corruption in the approval process. And this approval process, award and approval process, actually has been established that is controlled quite a bit by external factors who include politicians. And in a report by EACC, in a study by EACC, it was established that 13% of procurement officers and 43% of suppliers interviewed actually agreed that they are aware of cases where procurement decisions were influenced by external factors. 43% is a very high number of people to think this way. So I think that's another area that we need to look at that is deviant of the Procurement Act. In terms of contract management, substantial amounts of taxpayers' money are lost through cancelled contracts. You know, in the recent past, there were the issues of Aurora and Kemorer projects that were not finished because of, you know, the revisions in amounts of monies in the tender cost, tender amounts, which as a result is a matter of contract management. These are loopholes that we need to seal, noting that you know, tender prices average up to 60% above prevailing market prices. This is very serious because it means that the government is buying goods, services, and works at almost twice. One and a half times more than prevailing market prices. On payments, it was also realized that 63% of suppliers indicated that it takes 1 to 5 times more than normal to process payment. And that is wrong, because when a supplier has to work harder than normal to get payment, then this is wrong, as it also leads in delays. And that's the reason why we have pending bills. And so what are you doing to the economy? You're denying growth of the economy because you're stifling businesses from operating at optimum and thus making losses. So as I go towards the tail end of this presentation, I'll just give you a snapshot of just the broad regulatory compliance. Of course, the Procurement Act is an act that is very prescriptive, and so you find there are a lot of obligations that procurement entities and just the bodies that operate within it need to comply with to be able to just have the process run smoothly. So what does compliance monitoring include for the regulator? It means that they must review annual procurement plans, they must review mandatory reports, they must review procurement assessments. They must do procurement assessments and follow up on action plans. And what do I mean by action plans? You find that there may have been instances that flaws were encountered in their past reviews. Then they must follow up to establish that these flaws have been righted. And by doing this, they undertake a lot of, they're supposed to take a lot of inspections and also audit procurement contracts. This is an onerous task, you know, for the regulator, considering that we have an estimated 40,000 procurement agents. Please note that procurement entities cut across national and county level. So you can imagine the amount of monitoring for compliance that the PPRA has to deal with. The compliance level, as per the report in the fiscal year 2008, 2009, was an assessment of only, the compliance level for assessment of procuring entities was only 12% in 2008-2009 fiscal year. What am I saying? I'm saying that only 12%, I mean, the entities complied with the legislation at a level of 12%, which I think is a very dismal performance. The compliance rating for procurement entities, however, improved in 2017-2018 and at 55.5%. And this is considered moderate compliance rating because the cutoff point for a good performance is 60%. And even with the 55.5%, we note that only 27 procurement entities were inspected during that period in time. At that time also there was the risk rating, which was found to be at 44.5%, which is high. Average compliance level on procurement inspections of the entities was at 55.9%, which is considered good because it's just at the threshold of the 60% mark. And the risk moderate score was 44.1% for the same year. So what are the key indicators that they look at? They look at the institutional arrangement, they look at procurement processes, and also the management of contracts. At county level, they monitored the whole of county governments, both the county executive and the county assembly, during the financial year 2017-2018, and the average compliance score was 39.7%, which is considered non-compliant, with a high risk level of 60.3% for the executive. On the assembly side, the score for compliance was 46.6, with a risk score of 53.4. So we find that the executive at county level are doing very badly, and I think we need to focus on procurement at county level and just manage it before it goes bad. So what are the policy recommendations that we have broadly? I just want to mention that not all procurement entities are deviant to compliance requirements. I spoke to a procurement entity within the security, function of government, and I established that their compliance are strictly adhered to. Of course, things have changed over the past 15 or so years where compliance requirements were ignored, but now compliance is very strict. And what I established was, if you're caught in an impropriety, then you are summarily dismissed. and your career is messed going forward. So, and the procurement process is so streamlined, so that by the time that they're coming up with procurement plans within that security function, then they have done their research and established the needs very specifically, and also matched that to the budget to determine what they give priority and what they leave out. So they're actually procurement entities that are working well. So overall, of course, the implementation challenges of the procurement law. The law is not being strictly followed, and this is an enforcement issue that needs to be looked at. Maybe we may need a policy, a guiding policy to help in this going forward. We also need the established e-procurement portal to run aggressively, because it's through e-procurement that we're going to streamline a lot of these processes that the law so well articulates. And also for just transparency and accountability, it is important for us to automate a lot of the procurement functions, because in countries where this is happening, there's a lot of growth within that function, and the effects are felt in the economy, and because private sector is robust, and so contributions to the economy are increased. There's need for enhancement of monitoring and reporting by the regulator, and even just the procurement entities. This is a very weak point, because if we don't do proper monitoring and reporting, then things go wrong. Then we are not able to make proper decisions. Like I mentioned earlier, enforcement of law is a problem, and capacity, human capacity, financial capacity is also a big problem, and especially for the regulator. And this needs to be looked at so that we can have a more efficient procurement function in Kenya. So that's the end of my presentation in a nutshell. Yeah, I'm open for questions and comments. Thank you very much. Jackie?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for the very comprehensive presentation. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this, this is actually a paper. Her presentation is a summary of a paper that she has worked together with us in developing, and it's on, just as her presentation highlighted, the procurement system in Kenya. So Joanne has done a good job at taking us through the entire framework supporting public procurement and government contracting. And her presentation has looked at the legal and institutional framework on procurement. She's also helped us understand the current state of play, looking at, again, the laws, the institutions, the state of compliance to the requirements in law. And she's ended with some policy recommendations. So without trying to, again, go through her entire presentation, we invited 2 other speakers or discussants.
Sorry for that, I disappeared.
It's okay, Joanne. We invited 2 other discussants to, as I mentioned, this is a report, so they've had the benefit of looking at the report as well, to share their comments and some feedback from what they think are some matters arising from the report. So this paper or report will be available to the rest of us, to everyone else, from next week. But for this discussion, the presentation that she's made basically covers the entirety of the paper, but because we have 2 other persons who've had the benefit of looking at that, I will invite them to make some comments on on Joanne's findings, as well as what they think could be added, subtracted, the accuracy of some of those proposals made, And yeah, so we're going to just invite them to do that discussion. So first up, we will have Mr. Philip Gichana. Philip is also a lawyer, like Joanne. He's a lawyer, with experience in policy research and legislative development. Philip has worked in different capacities at the Institute for Legislative Affairs and Transparency International, and he has quite a bit of interest and experience working on public procurement, so he's very keen on the subject. So Philip, you're welcome. Just make your comments, a few comments on the paper.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I'm trying to turn my video on. Thank you so much for having me. And first is to say thank you, IEA and the team, for preparing such a comprehensive report, and Joan for the good job you've done in coming up with the paper. And actually, the recommendations that are coming out very clear. This comes out at a very interesting time when Kenya is undergoing quite a number of procurement scandals. And I don't mean only Kenya, quite a number of countries. We've seen in the UK right now that the Labour MPs are up in arms that the members of the Tory side is actually getting all the contracts, and it's creating quite a number of chaos. Here in the country, as we speak, there's been protests, I think I've seen in Kisumu and various towns, on just the issue of procurement and especially how the COVID funds were spent. So the report comes out at a very critical time in our country and even in the world. And thank you so much for that comprehensiveness of that report. Kenya procurement system is also considered, is actually considered a very high risk area for even investors. Various the global reports, that is the global competitive reports and the World Economic Forum indicate that corruption remains very pervasive in procurement processes, with development practice of the practice of favorism towards well-connected funds and individuals deciding upon cases, upon contracts and policies. So I won't want to belabor what Joan has actually spoke, but what I love about the report was what was captured, and the insistence on the report that efficient public procurement has a direct impact on poverty reduction, and that is considering government programs are implemented through procurement of goods, infrastructure, and service, which have a multiplier effect on the socio-economic situation in the country. So just to note that. And I also quickly wish to highlight that also the report is cognizant that the initial trend of procurement reforms in the country, which started actually like 20 years ago, and has been focused on improving the regulatory framework and building skills for personnel in the supply chain. It's quite interesting that the procurement in Kenya before 2005 was actually basically guided by circulars, as Joanne had indicated, and manuals, and it didn't have actually a proper framework. But thank God to our drafters of the Constitution who found it imperative. It has to go into the Constitution. It is something very important that can't just be left like that, and did so via the Article 227 of the Constitution. So the report also mentioned PPPs in passing. I have seen that in passing. Maybe that could also be elaborated a little bit further. They have a huge role that they play in the country, and in the process of also the procurement process. So as part of the principles of public procurement, that is also on transparency, there is also need to note the Access to Information Act that also captures public entities as any entity performing a function within a commission, government agency, or other bodies established under the Constitution. And as such, all PPPs must adhere to Article 35 of the Constitution on access to information, and the Act itself. Even when they have been awarded these contracts, they should be the kind of disclosure, and especially the proactive disclosure that is required. So that said, there is one thing maybe that I noticed, Joanne, and I was proposing that there is also need to cite the Executive Order number 2 of 2018, which even if it's not legislation, it's an administrative instrument that was designed to improve the procurement efficiency and transparency. And thus, maybe we cannot, I know it is implementation and effectiveness can be a subject of another discussion, but of course it has also changed on how procurement in the country is also done. Secondly, there is also in the legislative framework, together with the access to information, they might not be directly linked to the procurement processes, but they're incidentally to the process. There's also the need to also acknowledge some offenses that are prescribed under the Process of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, which also forms part of the that would form part of the policy and legislative outline of procurement in the country. I also noted the public procurement information portal has not featured largely, despite it also being a very crucial component in the current procurement system. I know you have highlighted on how comprehensive that portal is not. Maybe a little bit could be just highlighted as a proposal on the same, so that information can be, when we make those recommendations, then is also captured. And yeah, of course, you have highlighted that the annual reports are not consistent over the period under review. And but we also need a recommendation towards that end, that then the annual reports should also be consistently updated and posted in the PPRA. Now, interestingly, and with these times that we are living in, I would have maybe wanted to see a little bit of what we do in the emergency procurement. We've seen quite a number of people being cited and being called COVID billionaires in this period. But then the PPRA had actually issued a circular, and quite a number of circulars, I think, just between the month of February and March, quite a number of circulars that were issued on also the procurement. And for me, interestingly, is the circular number 2 of 2020. I was on preventive measures for handling of procurement activities, especially during this COVID period. So I don't know if that could also be looked and see if there's any effectiveness on those circulars, and especially just a small aspect of the emergency procurement, because I feel that is also one of the biggest gaps and where we've lost quite a lot of money during this period, and even before, when people create emergencies for these purposes of procurement. So, and then, yeah, as the paper, part of the policy recommendations, I noticed there was also silent, the paper was a bit silent on the role of CSOs and citizens as we can play in improving the public procurement processes. I'm aware of quite a number of initiatives that are taken by a number of institutions and CSOs, that is including TI, HIVOS, and quite a number of them. And they're increasingly becoming some of the principles that are emerging and guiding the public procurement reforms. And as such, we should also discuss as part of maybe the emerging trends in public procurement in Kenya when doing that analysis, when coming up with such a paper. So it's just a proposal that we could look at what role can the CSOs and the public, or sometimes you get a feeling that the public is reached a point where they don't know what to do. They are disenfranchised and they keep seeing these malpractices, especially in the procurement processes, and they really don't know where they can plug in and ensure that there is transparency and accountability in that process. And lastly, from my end, there are quite a number of initiatives that government has been undertaking. And one of it is the 8th, the International Anti-Corruption Conference that was in Copenhagen. It featured a high-level meeting among the OECD countries and the non-OECD countries, among also other regional bodies. And there are quite a number of statements that have been made, and these were premised on the OGP action plan under the UK summit, the UNCAC, as you've mentioned, and a number of instruments. For me, Kenya made like 8 commitments that are related to the fight against corruption, and I think around 3 or 4 that are specific to the procurement processes in the country. I thought it would also be good to mention those commitments, since I feel some of them have been implemented, not very well, but they have been implemented, and some have not been implemented. So when maybe we make also these recommendations, we may need to specifically tell government those kind of recommendations or commitments that they made, that they need to actually follow through and ensure they are implemented. Otherwise, from my end, those were my quick comments. I will share a comprehensive report and input tracking on the document. But thank you very much, Joanne, for that comprehensive report, and IEA for organizing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philip. I can tell your keen interest and passion for this subject. Thank you for the very useful comments. I believe Joanne has noted them down. I believe these are all very useful additions and contributions. I was also keen on the aspect of CSOs and citizens' role, what more we can do. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, this is actually work and supported by HIBOs that you mentioned, who have been championing for the whole open contracting. So it's a CSO-led initiative that has had impact even to government's response to contracting. I know the Open Government Partnership Initiative, Kenya is we are committed to that, and it was actually led, or it's an initiative by CSOs. So we do have a role that we can play, and I think that should also come out in the report. You've made some useful comments, which I believe Joanne has noted and will probably respond to if need be. But thank you so much for that. So next, I will invite Ms. Itoto Echakara. Itoto is also a trained advocate. I think today we have many lawyers here. So she's a trained advocate, also with experience in policy and legislative development like Philip is. Itoto is also a trained mediator, and she's had experience working on parliamentary affairs and providing technical support to government and especially parliament, in particular on policy, legislation, and constitution implementation. I also requested her to make some comments on the report, and I'd like to invite her to share with us what she found as some of the matters arising. So Itoto, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Joan. How are you, Joan? Let me just get my...
Hi, Irene. Good to meet you here.
As always, it's a pleasure. I have a few observations. I think it's a good report. I believe it's a good report, but I had a few comments and observations about it. I think maybe the first one that is attached to primarily what I do is maybe I have noticed there is a comprehensive framework, legal framework for procurement in the country. I mean, it's a very good, robust framework. So as you've done a good review and analysis of the legal framework, maybe one of the things that you can try and do is maybe distill some of the sections that have gaps. And then those sections then can be maybe converted to proposed amendments, so that then, as we know, government would like to hear what specific section, what are the gaps, and then what are the possible solutions. So for me, that would be the first thing. And it can go into the recommendations. I know that's a bit of work, but I think it will be useful information. The other thing that I observed was the issue of how to integrate procurement planning with the budget cycle. You had mentioned the security sector and how they've done that, but I think the procurement planning can assist in the budget cycle. However, there may be issues in the developmental. For recurrent expenditure, I think it's probably fairly mundane and it's fairly straightforward. Can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Yes,
Yes,
we can hear you.
Sorry.
Can hear you.
It was a bit too quiet there. So I was saying that for recurrent expenditure, probably it may be easier to integrate the procurement planning and procurement plans in the budget cycle. However, I think the challenge arises in the developmental expenditure. And we know developmental expenditure includes things like, the Big Four agenda, free primary education, and the various major policy issues that the administration, current, past, are trying to tackle. And I think that's also where the challenge may arise in terms of budgeting and procuring. And it's also depending on what it is you're looking for. You've mentioned the Aror and Kimwarer. Again, how do you procure standard for a dam? What are the requirements? What are the specifications? Is that something that is fairly straightforward to come up with? And, such things. So for me, I think maybe that's an area we need to think about, and how to ensure that there is integration to some degree. And then the second issue that I also looked at is we have the three arms of government, and looking at the framework, the accounting officers have been given the task of issues of procurement. However, there may be an issue of lack of harmonization in terms of procurement in the three arms of government here: Parliament, Executive, Legislature, and Judiciary, sorry. And how then they can actually ensure that, as the accounting officers, that procurement is being complied with properly. Probably many of them may not be technical. They will obviously need technical assistance. You mentioned that there's a gap in terms of competencies, personnel competencies. That is something that can be looked into and fast-tracked. Then the final comment and observation that I may have is regarding audit. I was looking at the Office of the Auditor General Act, not Attorney General, Auditor General Act, and one of the types of audits that they do is procurement audits. I'm wondering, in terms of trying to mitigate and also assess compliance to procurement and procurement legislation, as well as practice, as well as identify risks. I'm thinking, and maybe Joan, you can guide on that, because I think most parastatals are required to do audits, and I'm assuming they may have internal auditors. So I'm not sure what happens with all the other government bodies, but I'm sure there must be an internal auditor. And so that one of the things that they can be doing, or that can be mainstreamed, is to have the audit report to include a procurement audit within their framework or their reports, so that then that can help and assist in terms of compliance and anything else related to that. So those are my comments and observations. I hope to make more comprehensive ones as time goes on, but Joan, it was a good report. It is interesting to see the history of procurement in the country, and the IEA for organizing this webinar.
All right. Thank you so much, Itoto, for your comments and your feedback. Also very useful. I think Joan has had an opportunity to note them down, and those will also be shared in written form, so that we can be able to see how to incorporate them into the final version of the report. As I mentioned, we are wrapping up the development of this study, and so by end of next week, we should have the final report available, both in soft and hard copies. I know nowadays with the stay at home and little physical mingling, the hard copy versions have not in use as they were in the past, but we will have some copies of that. But from next week, you should be able to access this report on our website. We will share them. We'll share these as well as also share on our social media platform when we have the final version ready. We'll have also received requests for this presentation. It will be available at the end of the discussion. So as I wrap up on my end, I'd like to thank you very much to our three speakers. Joanne, thank you for that comprehensive presentation. Thanks Itoto and Philip. And now I'd like to invite Kwame to take us through to moderate the plenary discussions. Kwame, you're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Thanks a lot, Joanne. Thanks, Philip, and thanks, Itoto. And now, I know we have just 20 minutes to go before we conclude, so I won't try to sum up, but I'll just say a few things that came from Joanne's presentation. I think the summary, or rather the detail of the procurement systems, the institutions of procurement and the processes is very detailed. I think that for that we give you credit, and thanks for the meticulous work that places it there. We've seen some of the challenges that occur. I think some of them might be in the law, some of them might be questions about enforcement, oversight, and just generally the overwhelming nature. But one of the things that most surprised me was that we have 40,000 procurement entities in Kenya. So that tells you that this is a machine that's running on 40,000 different parts, and each of those parts could create a fault one way or the other. But I think it also emphasizes the fact that for the entire procurement system to run well, I think all these 40,000 units or 40,000 different components have to do their work fairly well, using the same procurement platforms and that. So that's one. The second thing you confirm in the study is that basically the contract management part is basically the Achilles heel of Kenya's procurement system, and particularly that in the of course contract management is basically once an award has been made. If we even leave aside the questions of transparency about how awards are made, so obviously I think there's work to be done to unpack Kenya's procurement, and a good portion of it has been done here. One of the other things that this has, Joanne has also demonstrated to us, I think both Itoto and Philip have alluded to it, is we really need to answer the question about why Kenya's procurement system is inefficient, in the sense that you're buying goods even when the laws are followed. How comes the government of Kenya buys goods consistently and services consistently above market rates? And it's not enough to say that the systems have been, that every box has been ticked and that the checklist has been made. There's just something about how this procurement system fits in. And what I think is, while, of course, we had a whole bench of lawyers, panel of lawyers, my view is that it's not something we can tinker with through the law. There might be legal weaknesses here and there, but I don't think it's something we can tinker with through the law. As we were having the presentation, I very quickly went through the Act PPDA, Public Procurement and Disposal Act, the revised version in 2016, and I found out that this procurement law has 32,876 words, and it's an 85 pages document on an A4. So it's not the absence of law, and this is law before we talk about the regulations and all those other things. So I think as people who are examining procurement in Kenya, it's clear we are drowning in rules and laws and words and pages and everything that needs to be done. So we ask ourselves, why is the mechanical part of procurement management going badly? And John has given us some of those. Of course, they're obviously inbuilt incentives. If you have 40,000 people doing work right at the back, and nobody knows them by name, and nobody can look at their processes, obviously, the question of numbers is one of them. And maybe an e-portal, or rather e-procurement would be one of them. But an e-procurement or a digitizing procurement will not help if we do not have transparency and the possibility for real-time audit. So perhaps that's one thing that we need to bear in mind. But I like the fact that Joanne mentioned an astronaut going up, Glenn, and he's going up in space, and the first thing that comes to him is even the government of the US taking a risky mission, taking well-trained people up in space, are still buying goods and services at the most competitive rates. So definitely, it is possible to do very complex things and all that. And as I conclude, Philip has mentioned, of course, the emergency regulations that the PPRA puts up. So, and of course, we've seen what happened about the big messes that have occurred at KEMSA and every other place in the Ministry of Health regarding procurement under COVID. And my view again is, I think with the background that Joanna has provided to us, it's not surprising, because if government consistently buys things at a higher cost than others and justifies it by saying, look, we followed the laws as they exist, when an emergency in which you have to pull up all the stops, right? The emergency actually just provides bigger evidence for the reason that we have a leaking procurement infrastructure. So my intention is not to discourage everybody, but I'd like us now to start our conversation, knowing we have about 15 minutes. So let's open up a conversation. Please ask or make your comments. If you can use a chat box, that's fine, but you also have this facility where you can raise your hand. So please raise your hand, and then I'll point to you, and you can ask your question, and John will answer. Of course, any of the panelists who has an opportunity, who has something to say should do that as well. So let me get your comments, please. Any comments or questions? Anyone? Anyone with a question? I haven't seen any raised hands. I haven't seen any comments on the chat box. Okay. Well, in the absence of that, as you all prepare, maybe I should ask Joanne to respond to the comments by Philip and Itoto. Joanne, any comments to? Any responses to the comments by the panelists, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kwame. Thank you very much, Philip and Itoto, for your very useful comments. Of course, I have taken them and will put them into consideration as I just enrich the document. Philip, I agree on your observation on Article 35 of the Constitution in terms of access to information. That's very critical in public procurement, because access to information is a big part of opening up, that whole arena to the public using the law. Public procurement portal. Okay, I will add some flesh in respect to that, but I think it is one aspect that we need to work with and bring out well. I notice the incorporation of the circulars and the executive orders that you have mentioned. I will have a look at them as well, and the policy proposals to have CSOs, to just drive the civic education aspect of public procurement. I have noted your comments, both of you, and I will take them into consideration. And thank you very much, IEA, for giving me this opportunity to just make this analysis. And yeah, I will make improvements and have the report ready as Jackie has informed us. So I do not have any, questions to respond to really, but just to appreciate the comments that have come through.
Okay, Joanne, there are two questions that have come through. One of them is from Olunga Agutu. He talks about the circulars, like the 30% preference. Actually, it's called the Access to Government Procurement Opportunity, AGPO, and it's not a circular anymore. It's actually been incorporated into the procurement law, and the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority monitors that. So he's asking about, they're just suggestions when there is no penalty for entities who flout it. So basically, what Agut is asking, well, it's a comment, but he's asking the presidential executive orders that have no punitive measures, yet they're making yet very good initiatives for making the processes open. Which way forward? John, can you respond to that about AGPO and the fact that it has no enforcement. I mean, it has no punitive measures.
Okay. Maybe just to pick on AGPO. In fact, I had mentioned to Jackie earlier that that's an area that I had actually analyzed, but for some reason it did not get its way into the report. I'll incorporate it. And what is happening, just to mention, I know that public service has a performance contract that is related to AGPO. So what is the requirement? The requirement is at least that directive needs to be, to be taken up and implemented. So I know that it forms, is it 1%? 1% of the points that public entities earn in their performance process. So it's taken very seriously. I know where I work, we are looking at it very seriously. I have also had instances of speaking to the various national government agencies, and even in terms of them, running retreats and all, there is this rush to just, give opportunities to entities and companies that are run by youth, women, and people living with special needs. So I know it's a directive that's taken very seriously, and it needs to be endangered. I'm not sure we need to always, punish people. And especially on issues of affirmative action, we just need to keep encouraging and maybe reward. Reward works better because when you reward people, then they take up directives better. So Alunga, it's called Olunga or Alunga. That initiative is being implemented in earnest in public service. That is something I can confirm. Olunga, yeah, thanks.
Joan, there's another question. There's a hand up by Shelmith Mugo. So please go ahead, Shelmith, and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. For me, I think in the report you should also include something to do with government-to-government procurement and the inefficiencies that come with it, especially to do with delays in the supply of goods and the quality of goods. Then in the presentation, one of the policy recommendations, which you've also alluded to, Kwame, is the establishment of e-procurement. Yet, like the government also established the IFMIS to do with finance and reporting on finance. But we've seen how IFMIS has been misused. So which measures can be taken to ensure that the e-procurement is not misused? The third one is just a concern. One of the things we've realized is that the suppliers, some of them take such a long time before they are paid. So what is the remedy for some of these suppliers who probably it has taken like 2 years, they've given all the documentation, they've already supplied the goods, but probably because of an audit going on, like the NYS sagas, they've not been paid for such a long time, and they've incurred a lot of even probably court cases, and they still have to pay loans in banks. Thank you.
Okay, John, could you respond to that?
Can I respond?
Yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, John, please respond. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Your mic, please.
Okay. Yeah, I got that. On the issue of government-to-government procurements, there's a whole on the legislative framework. There's a whole discussion on the paper on it, and there's a lot of improvements that have been put in place through regulations, where part of the directive is to give specific percentages of raw materials from sources that are within the country, issues of employment and technology transfer. So that is something that I have mentioned in the report at a great extent. Establishment of e-procurement is important, and like I mentioned, it is something that we need to put in place because it is a provision in law. I believe, when you have less interface between watu, between human beings, then processes are more efficient. So it is something that I believe that procurement entities, it's something that I believe the regulator needs to look at in earnest and bring it up to speed, because it will improve a lot on the procurement process. I don't know, is there anything else that I haven't answered from Shelmith?
No, I don't think there is. So because we are out of time, let me circle the panels and ask for any concluding comments from this time. I'll start with Philip. Any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Kwame. Maybe just on the issue, I'd want to speak on the issue of the prompt payments. I think there is already a legislation. I know we agree these things. We've gotten a hammer every time there's a problem. We come up with that legislation, but there is also a circular that was issued, I think, by the Treasury on payments. We hope these things will be fast-tracked. I think there's been quite a number of complaints, and it has caused some pain to suppliers, to government. So I hope that will be an initiative that the government will really take up and ensure that all sagas and even the counties are able to pay their suppliers. And also lastly, there is an issue that there was not really a question, but just a kind of dilemma that was brought here, that we have very good presidential directives in form of executive orders that really do not have sanctions. But what I think is they do actually have a sanction. Administrative directives bind the officers of government in both levels. So in as such, it's only maybe the PSC and the individual commissions or that should take up every time somebody is not adhering to such an executive order. This executive order number 2 of 2018 was quite comprehensive in terms of how the public officers should be handling matters procurement. That will be all from my side, Kwame. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip.
Kwame.
Yes, go ahead, Johan.
Yeah, on the issue of payments, I don't know. I think Irene Itoto is the one who mentioned that we need to link the budgeting process with the procurement process, and it's actually a provision that it's in law. I don't know why we don't follow it, because what is happening is suppliers are not paid, not because maybe there's no money, but I think it's because we try to undercut the procurement process and do not follow the plans and budgets. So what happens is we probably give contracts to our buddies, people who, or for probably goods and services that had not been planned for. And so you find that people who may have supplied earlier on based on the plans and budgets, then are left behind and are not paid. So I think these are issues of integrity. These are the risks we were talking about, and they have a basis in law. So I have never understood how we have such a huge amount of pending bills when it's very clear that you cannot procure outside planning, you cannot procure outside the budget. So issues of conflict of interest, issues of integrity here that we need to look at. And like we say, you cannot legislate adabu. You cannot legislate manners. We just need to work on our integrity to be able to address those.
Okay. Thanks, John. Shall we speak to Itoto? Any final comments?
No, not really, Kwame.
Okay, fine. So I'll ask John to conclude and then I'll pass it back to Jackie. John, any final comments, please?
Thank you very much, IEA. This was a very interesting, study to make, and I have taken the comments very positively. I will use them to enrich the document, and of course, as I was listening to all of you, I got a lot of bulb moments that will help me just enrich the document, and I hope that I'll be through with it in good time. Thank you for the opportunity, and God bless you.
Fine. So I'll pass us back to Jackie. Jackie, please, you can close the meeting and let us know when the report should be out and any other updates. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kwame. Mine is just to wrap this up. So in terms of the way forward, we have an almost complete report. The draft is it's actually complete. As Joanne has said, she'll enrich it by way of the comments that have been made here, as well as the feedback from the plenary, all very useful. Discussants will submit the written comments, which again will be sent to Joanne for the final report. So by next week, today being Tuesday, by next week we should have the final document. As I stated earlier, we plan to print just a few copies for those of you who may be interested in hard copies, as I mentioned, but we will have the final version in a digital format, the soft copy version available on our website. We will communicate the exact date of this, possibly by Monday, which is 31st of August. We should have the final report, given that the comments that have been made here are not so much to alter the content, but just to enrich it. So by Monday latest, we should have the digital version. Then we'll also proceed to make a few copies. So if you're interested, you can reach out to us, our communications team, plan on how to get you a copy, or you can pass by our office and pick one. So that's it in terms of the way forward. I'd like to very sincerely thank our speakers today. Thank you so much, Joanne, for doing this assignment, for the comprehensive report that you've given us. We know it was not much time that we availed to you, but you've done a good job. So we thank you. I'd also like to thank the two discussants who also had very little time to review and make comments on the report. And I think you've all had was very useful feedback. Thank you, Philip, for the feedback and for the additional comments. Thanks, Itoto, for reviewing the document and for your comments. And we appreciate it. For everyone who attended the forum, we also thank you for taking your time to be here, way past the amount of time that we had allocated for this. IEA is a membership institution. If you'd be interested in becoming a member, kindly reach out to our communications team, and they'll be able to assist you. And more information on how to join is available on our website. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, and keep looking on our platforms for information, other upcoming webinars. So thank you and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Jackie. Bye. Ay, 50.